Hello everyone, welcome to this video. I wanted to make a quick showcase of some of the projects that I've been working on for the past month and a half, because whenever I extensively talk about a project that I've been working on, through words it's really hard to convey just exactly what the purpose of a project is and what goes into the implementation of one of these projects and what is the overall benefit. Whenever I end up talking about some of these projects, I often get the response, why are you working on such a silly project when you get nothing in return and it doesn't help you in your job prospects? Which, mind you, some of the tools that I'm working on have already been developed by other people. So why build a skill set around something that's not prospectable? Evidently, since I'm making a video about this, you're probably going to be expecting some spectacular big project that probably takes 3 or 4 years to make. That is not going to be the case, but I do want to add 2 data points before we get into the weeds of things. That way people aren't too critical when they start to look at this video. 1, the projects you are about to see have been in development for about a month and a half. I want to say that as hopefully a bonus to say what that shows on my side is, given the same amount of time frame, you could probably expect the same amount of progress. The second data point that I sort of want to showcase here is, within the same period of time, I have also been using Linux. If you look at the screen right now with this user interface, this isn't Mac OS and this isn't Windows. I have been experimenting with different Linux distros, and I'm not 100% new to Linux when this time frame came up, but I definitely wasn't a 100% user of Linux. In other words, Linux wasn't my main operating system before this 2-month frame period had occurred. So I want you to also take into account, whenever you're looking at some of these projects, that I was also learning how to work in a Linux set environment. Okay, with those 2 data points out of the way, here is some of the projects that I've been working on in the past month and a half. A quick note on some of these projects: anytime I mention some of the stuff that I'm working on, I often get the response as to what kind of certificate I'm going to get out of this, or what kind of degree does this specialize in. I often get one of these sort of reward system type of questions, and the response I often give to that is, these projects are only meant to build up my skill set. The original purpose of these projects were to build up skills that are perceivingly lost in the technical industry as we know it. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it might surprise very few people to say that software is actually getting tremendously slower nowadays, and thanks to AI, that speed decrease is happening at a more exponential rate. What do I mean by slow? I mean software runs tremendously slower than the amount of clock speed that you get with today's hardware and multi-threading capability. Now, to the average consumer, software might not be running as slow as stated. However, they might be aware of a tremendous number of bugs that we post all the time, because software, not only is it slower, but it is much more buggier. And that is something that the consumer will notice. With that being said, a single man, Casey Muratori, decided to make a course whose entire idea to solving this problem is to pass down as much knowledge as possible that was used before we got dependent on libraries and abstractions. The name of that course was Handmade Hero. Now, Handmade Hero is a tough subject to talk about when it comes to courses, because, as I mentioned, it doesn't give you a certificate at the end. And if I were to recommend this to a new developer, immediately they would see one of the drawbacks, which is it's very time consuming. There is about 700 episodes, and the shortest episode, I believe, is around 1 hour and 20 minutes, while the longest episode can be about 4 hours. So immediately when I bring this course up, people will just roll their eyes and choose to ignore it. So then why do I continue to use this project? For one, I obviously haven't completed it. I think I've gone as far as probably episode 45. Of course, within this month and a half, I obviously restarted the course and I think I'm up to episode 35, but that's neither here nor there. The reason why I continue to take this course is because it gives you invaluable skills that I'm going to show off later in this video, but skills that I believe our industry, the technical industry, has lost, thanks to relying on third-party libraries and layers of abstraction. But please, don't take my opinion about this course too seriously, because I have 3 engineers that can vouch for this course way better than I can. The first engineer is the creator of FilePilot. For those of you that don't know about this application, if you are still running Windows operating system, I highly encourage you to install this application. It is just a straight competitor to File Explorer. This developer has given a talk recently about their strategy to creating this application, and in the talk they mentioned that they've done only about 30 or so episodes of Handmade Hero, and then they instantly got inspired to make something like this. And if you use this application, you'll immediately see the benefits of how far software can go in today's hardware and how far behind we actually are. In the second application, we have a competitor to Git. Now, this doesn't have a website equivalent to GitHub, although I think you can just host the result to GitHub anyway. I'm not quite sure how this works. I've been using it as a local server to store all my stuff. Now everything that it stores just transfers so much faster than any time that I've ever used Git, and so I continue to use this as a version control system rather than Git. And lastly, the third application is the Rad Debugger, which for those of you that don't know, this is the official debugger for engineers that are debugging the Unreal Engine. I believe this has been in the works since Unreal Engine 4, but like the other 2 engineers, the developer for this application did a couple of episodes of Handmade Hero, suddenly got some inspiration, and decided to work on a debugger. Now it's the official debugger for the Epic team. These engineers and many more now lead talks in a conference called the Better Software Conference, hoping to spread better information about software development in general. I think that tells you enough about Handmade Hero and as to why I'm taking the course. So on to the second course, which is Computer Enhance, also made by Casey Muratori. This one is more focused towards performance in software and how to get better performance no matter the programming language you're working with or how big the project actually is. I'm going to be showing a project from both courses, so don't worry if this isn't enough context. I'm going to get to it later in the video. Okay, I think that's enough preamble. Let's get to the projects that I've been working on for the past month and a half. The first project is where I'm currently at in Handmade Hero. Now, there are a lot of features that I want to show off for this project, so let's get into it. The project is an old school 2D game from the top-down camera view. If you imagine something like a classic Zelda, I believe at the end of the project that's going to be something close to what we're getting. So if I just build and run the project now, so here's the project. There's a lot of features, like I said, that I want to go over with this. First of all, I'm able to move this red box around. I'm going to call him the player, and I'm able to do that with a keyboard. If I was holding, let's say, an Xbox controller, it doesn't have to be connected. It could be connected via Bluetooth. I would be able to move the square around with that as well. We've got these sort of 4 corners that I can move around in. And I don't know why, but VirtualBox is doing something weird, so I had to readjust the window for that cut to show the outer perimeter of this application. So another thing I can move around is this blue box. It's controlled via my mouse, and notice they both kind of had this collision, so neither the red box nor the blue box is able to pass any of these white walls. As I control the player, I'm able to move around this sort of map area where I'm able to go through these sort of open walls, and it's a lot like a really old school 2D game. Now, what are some of the features? Well, one of them I have to talk about right off the rip. Whenever you start doing stuff from scratch without being dependent on libraries, you're going to be able to do stuff like hot reloading. What is hot reloading? Well, as you can see, I got the game running here, but you might notice there's no audio. Now currently in this build, I have an audio bug. I don't know what's wrong with the audio, and if you have a bug in an actual game using an actual game engine, you know what a pain it is to have to go and try and fix the bug and then rebuild. This is also the same for just modern software applications. But with hot reloading, that's kind of not a problem anymore. Now, I'm not going to fix the audio bug, but I do want to turn audio on just to show you that this application does support audio. But to do that, I'm not going to close the application. Let me minimize this here so we can get back to some of these console windows. I'm going to go to my source code. And here I got this function called game fill audio. If I change this last value, which is actually the tone volume, to 3000, that's going to be about close to 1/5 of the maximum volume that the monitor has. I went ahead and saved this file. Now I'm going to go down here and I'm going to rebuild the project. Notice also that I have this sort of faded version of the game whenever it's not the focus point. That's also some of the things that you can kind of do whenever you get down to this low-level operating system part of the code. And I'm just going to rebuild the entire project. Notice it didn't take that long. We have an error code, but guess what? If I click on the application, you're going to start to hear audio. Now I immediately click away because that's just annoying. So I'm going to go back to this code and just take out the tone volume completely. Again, we're not going to hear any audio, but another thing that I want to show that you can just do with this hot reloading, I'm going to find a variable here called player R, and what that is the red color of the player. And if you notice, that's turned all the way up, that's 100% red. If I lower that down to like, I don't know, 0.3 and save the file, then I go back here to Windows and I rebuild the entire project again. Okay, actually, you caught me. That didn't work the first time, but this is more of a VirtualBox Linux type of issue. I swear this works straight up on Windows, and we're gonna see this work in a minute on Linux. That's a bit of a hiccup. Obviously, the color updated, and there's no volume on the next run, but just to demonstrate, I'm gonna show you a little more quickly this time. That way there's no hang up, that this does actually work. So notice, our player is not so red anymore, but if we go back to this code and if I quickly put it to 1.0 and I rebuild here on Windows, you can see that immediately the player updates. I didn't need to stop the execution of this program. That happened during runtime. Another feature that I want to show about this application before we leave Windows land is the idea of saving and reloading. Now, the feature to save and reload isn't that by itself an impressive skill, but the moment I use it to replay code, you're gonna think, wow, this is really impressive. I'm gonna hit the left arrow key here, and I'm gonna do some crazy stuff to move around the character. Maybe we'll go off to this screen, and if I can find the opening, maybe we'll go off to the third screen. There it is. And, you know, we'll block here, and we'll end it with the green. And I'm going to hit the left arrow key again. Now, not only did you see how fast that was, that everything just immediately got reloaded, but we are playing back the events that just occurred from my keyboard and mouse movement. Not only is this a cool thing to showcase in like a game, but it's also a really useful debug feature. For instance, let's say that I think the player is actually just moving too fast and we want to slow him down a little bit. Now, this might actually break the game because I don't know if changing his velocity is actually gonna make him go to a place where he can't go, but we're gonna try it out anyway. So because of hot reloading, we can just go back to the code. We can find a thing called dPlayer, which is I have a loss on name, but I think displacement player. And this multiplying by 128, we're just going to change that to, I don't know, let's half that, say 68. Now, of course, I still need a rebuild, so let's do that real quick. And now the player is just going super slow. Of course, that doesn't affect the mouse because the mouse is in a different control scheme, but the player has just halved its speed, and now it can't really go to the places that it was going before, but the keyboard controls are still working in the same way that it was working before. If we just update the speed again, and I go here to rebuild, we should see the player going back into the map the same directions that it was going before. So we're going to get stuck there, then we go up, and now we're in this part of the map. And if everything went well, look at that. We had that green block appear. So this is just one of the crazy features that you can use whenever you start writing stuff from scratch. And not only is it just, again, a crazy feature to showcase, but you can see that it actually is really useful in development. If I wasn't doing just like dummy blocks here, you could imagine like if I had something intensive like gravity or some actual vehicle speed, you can see why this would be useful. Oh, and there's that stutter effect that happens with VirtualBox. I think what's happening is VirtualBox Windows is trying to lock the screen, and I guess VirtualBox doesn't know what to do in this situation. I don't know what's going on there. But we're going to close Windows because I want to show one last feature that this project also introduces. If I go back to the main directory of this project, you'll see that there's a list of files. You'll also see that there's some build files there. I mean, what is that? Well, Win32 was the build file for Windows. If I run X11, the build file for this will make the entire project Linux native. As you can see, that didn't take very long, and if I run that here in Linux, we can almost see the same project. Now, you can see some slight differences since not all files are up to date. Remember, I've only had a month and a half to work on this and other projects, so the Linux version isn't as updated as the Windows version, but you can see it almost does the exact same thing, and it is now running completely native to Linux. Again, I'm using my keyboard controls here, and if I had a Xbox controller connected, I would be able to use the Xbox controller as well. So in a nutshell, this project also displays the ability to natively make cross-platform projects. And one of the things I want to highlight about that specific case is there is no CMake and there is no makefile. In fact, if we open up the build script for either Windows or Linux, what we're going to see is both of them can actually fit on this screen. There it is. That's all the build that this project will ever do. In fact, I believe this stays the same, mostly the same. I'm sure there's like 3 or 4 more lines of code added to these build files, but that's it. There's no CMake, there's no cross-building system. It's just this. And in fact, I have also learned a way to just make it work for one C file and one build script alone, to where I would just need to use GCC once, maybe CL once, and I would get exactly what I need from just the source code. So I thought I'd also highlight that part to show exactly what is possible. Moving on to the computer enhanced side, one of the very first projects that you're asked to do as homework assignment for computer enhanced is to make a decoder for one of the original Intel 8086 CPUs. Now, because some of the fun that I was having at Handmade Hero, I decided to put some of those skills into use in here as well, and so I've kind of made a GUI version of the homework assignment. If I run the build script here, what you're going to end up seeing is, well, exactly that, a decoder for the 8086, at least some of the instructions. So real quickly, let me zoom into this application and I'll show you what I'm talking about. First of all, let me just show some of the features that I have. If I press spacebar, I'll go into single step mode where I can single step through the instructions that I'm decoding. Now, what's happening here, I get, isn't very clear, but basically this program is taking in a stream of bytecode and it's turning that bytecode into what an 8086 processor would actually interpret that binary to be. So at the top here, we can see the first 2 bytes that the binary is taking in, and at the bottom here, we are sort of showing what the CPU would actually interpret that binary to mean. For instance, this first box here is the actual processor opcode or operation code that the CPU would interpret that binary to mean. In this case, an add. At the top right, I show the current instruction that the CPU has decided that this binary stream represents. And then underneath that, I have a list of operations that we've already run through and executed. Behind the scenes, the computer is actually executing the instructions as if it was a simulator after it decodes the instruction. Unfortunately, I don't have a graphical representation of this, so you're going to have to take it at its word. At the very far right side here, what you'll see is actually the expected results. This is kind of meant to be run full screen right now, so if I zoom out and actually make it full screen, what you'll see is the expected results of instructions that I'm supposed to be getting from this binary stream. Zooming back in, that way I can show you the actual program in action. If I get out of single step mode, the computer is actually going to be running the instructions one by one. But real quickly, I want to show a feature to slow down the CPU before I get out of single step mode. And so I have 0 and 1 being the numbers to slow and speed up the CPU simulation. So I'm going to type 0 a couple of times. That way when I get out of single step mode, it won't be running super fast. Now here in the top right where it says running in single step mode, that's going to change to how much we've slowed down this simulation for. This is the CPU running at approximately 100,000 times slower than it would be if the program was running normally. I have R to reset the program so it can run the instructions again. This also is equipped with the same features that Handmade Hero has, such as hot reloading, but of course there's not really a need for that right now. And if I want it to be super crazy, I can crank up that speed increase to, let's say, by 0, and when I hit reset, you're going to see that the CPU runs all these instructions basically at an instant. So the smallest step I decided to make was 20,000. That way you can actually see something that's perceived as the CPU actually doing something. So I didn't want to act like I was lying. There is actually simulation happening here. If I zoom in real quickly, this is the exact same program. As you can see, it's under the computer enhanced code, and then this is the simulator part. Down here in GDB, I've printed the registers that are happening, and the moment that we step over this move function, you can see that the actual registers of the simulated CPU have updated, and it was indeed a move instruction. So that's the result of my first project in Computer Enhanced, although there's still one more project that I've been working on for the past month and a half. Because I'm about to start my journey back into the job market, I decided that I should freshen up on some data structure and algorithm problems, since those are usually what's asked about in technical interviews. So I made a program that would allow me to try and problem solve some data structure and algorithm problems, as well as give me the average time that it takes for my program to solve one of these problems. Now I say average because what I've learned with these two courses that I've been taking is sometimes you get cache hits and sometimes you get cache misses, and these often depend on rather the variables that you're spitting into the CPU have been fresh in the cache or have been evicted from the cache and possibly even evicted from RAM itself. So with these programs, I kind of wanted to get myself ready for having some profiling that I can do later. So I can ask the program how many times I want this test to run, and I can see what the average result was out of that. And hopefully eventually I could get the top result and the worst result. I should have mentioned before I ran this that currently this is running the Snowflake test. For those that haven't seen or heard about the Snowflake test, you are given a number of snowflakes, and that's the number that's appearing multiple times on the right side to test, whatever number. And within the program, you are told to return whether or not two snowflakes within this large set of snowflakes are identical. Here at the end of my program, you can see that this test has been run 100 times, and the average execution time for those runs is 0.11 seconds. And that would kind of add up, because if you multiply 0.11 by 100, you should expect to get 11 seconds, which is what the terminal says that how long this program took to run. And finally, I had also been working on web development skills to make a website such that I can showcase these projects in a one convenient spot that people can just come and look at, and if I so decide to choose to, upload the files of these projects so everyone can view them no matter what operating system you're on. This website isn't very professional, I 100% admit that, but it does have some abilities that other websites lack. One obvious one is this is rendered, and I'm able to move around with typical WASD controls. And if I hit the H key, this terminal up here will appear, and you can update some of the stuff about the website. Now this website is live and is expected to be changed whenever I have more time and navigation as to how I'm going to handle the final result of this website. Needless to say, it's going to have some 3D rendering and some graphics because that's kind of been the core concept of how I've been approaching all these projects. So that's kind of what I've been working on for the past month and a half. I hope this showcase was something that you enjoyed, and I hope this answered the two questions that I've been asked recently. What have I been working on, and what is the purpose of the projects that I've been working on? Thank you.